Welcome back to Tech Stack for all you tech enthusiasts. This is part 5 of our Angular 22 series. In this video, we will learn about data binding in Angular and understand how data is connected between the component and the HTML template. There are two main types of data binding: one-way data binding and two-way data binding. One-way binding means data flows in only one direction between the component and the HTML template. Open the integrated terminal in the Pages folder. Run the command ngGC data binding to generate a new component named data binding. Open the databinding.ts file and copy its selector. We'll use this selector to display the component in our app. Open the app HTML file and use this selector to add the data binding component to the page. Open the app.ts file and add the data binding class to the imports array. This allows Angular to use the data binding component in our app. Open the integrated terminal and run the ngserve command to start the Angular development server. Copy the URL and open it in your browser to test the application. As you can see, our data binding component is now displayed successfully in the browser. In one-way data binding, the first type we'll learn is interpolation. Interpolation is a way to display data from the TypeScript component in the HTML template using double curly braces. In simple words, data flows from TypeScript to HTML. Close all the open files and open the databinding.ts file so we can demonstrate interpolation. Let's create a variable called name and assign it the value John. We'll use this variable to demonstrate interpolation. Open the databinding.html file and add a paragraph tag. Add double curly braces and write the name variable inside them. This will display the value of the name variable from our TypeScript file in the HTML. Test the application in the browser. As you can see, the value John is displayed successfully in the browser using interpolation. Let's add an input tag to our HTML. We'll use this input to demonstrate another example of interpolation. Set the name and ID attributes of the input to name. Add the value attribute, and inside it, use double curly braces with the name variable. This will bind the value of the name variable to the input using interpolation. Test the application in the browser. As you can see, the value is displayed inside the input field. This is interpolation, and it allows us to display data from TypeScript in our HTML. Next, we'll learn about property binding. Property binding is another type of one-way data binding in Angular. It allows us to bind a component property to an HTML element property. In simple words, data flows from TypeScript to HTML. Let's add a new input element to demonstrate property binding. Add square brackets around the value attribute. This tells Angular that we are using property binding. Assign the name variable to the value property and test it in the browser. As you can see, the value John is displayed inside the input field using property binding. Add a BR tag to create some space between the input fields. Open the databinding.ts file and change the value of the name variable to Rio. As you can see, the name has been updated to Rio in the input field. This shows that property binding automatically reflects the updated value from TypeScript to HTML. Add the min-length variable to the property binding. This allows us to set the minimum length of the input dynamically from TypeScript. We have set its value to 3. Now, in the HTML, add square brackets around min-length to use property binding. Assign the min-length variable to the min-length property and test it in the browser. Let's inspect the input field in the browser and check the min-length property. As you can see, the min-length property is being set dynamically from TypeScript. This is property binding. Before moving ahead, as you know, we've started our Angular 22 series, from beginner to advanced. Learn practical skills to grow your development career. subscribe, and join the journey. Next, we'll learn about event binding. Event binding allows us to handle events, such as clicks and input changes, in our Angular application. In event binding, data flows from HTML to TypeScript. Add a BR tag to create some space before we add the next element. Add a button and set its text to show message. Open the databinding.ts file and add a function called showMessage. We'll use this function to demonstrate event binding. Copy the function name and use it for the button's click event. This will allow the showMessage function to run when we click the button. Add parentheses around click to create the event binding. Use the showMessage function inside the click event. This connects the button click to our TypeScript function. Open the databinding.ts file and add an alert inside the showMessage function. This alert will be displayed when we click the button. Inside the alert, enter the message Welcome to Angular 22. This message will appear in a pop-up when we click the Show Message button. Let's test it in the browser. Click the Show Message button and check the alert. As you can see, the alert appears with the message Welcome to Angular 22. This confirms that our event binding is working correctly. Let's add a select element to demonstrate another example of event binding. Set the name and ID attributes to department. Let's add an option element inside the select. Set the option value to HR and also display HR as the option text. Let's add another option to the select dropdown. Set the value to IT and display IT as the option text. Open the databinding.ts file and add a change department function that we will bind this function to the select element so it runs whenever the selected department changes. Add an alert inside the change department function. This alert will be triggered whenever we change the selected department. Set the alert message to department changed. This message will appear whenever we select a different department. Copy the change department function name and open the databinding.html file. Inside the parentheses, add the change event. This will trigger our function whenever the selected department changes. Use the change department function with the change event and test it in the browser. Select a different department and check whether the alert appears. As you can see, the event binding is working correctly. This brings us to the end of one-way data binding. We covered 3 types: interpolation, property binding, and event binding. Now, let's move on to two-way data binding. Two-way data binding means that data can flow in both directions. It allows us to send data from TypeScript to HTML and also send updated data from HTML back to TypeScript. In Angular, we can use ngModel to implement two-way data binding. Let's try changing the value of the input using interpolation. You will notice that when we change the input value, it does not update the value in other places. This is because interpolation provides one-way data binding. Next, we'll use ngModel to implement two-way data binding and see how the value updates in both directions. First, we need to import the FormsModule. This module provides the ngModel directive, which we'll use for two-way data binding. Open the HTML file and add a BR tag to create some space before we add our next input field. Let's add an input field. We'll use this input to demonstrate two-way data binding with ngModel. First, add square brackets. Then, inside the square brackets, we'll add parentheses. Together is called the banana in a box syntax, which Angular uses for two-way data binding. Add ngModel inside the banana in a box syntax. Use the name variable with ngModel and test it in the browser. As you can see, when we change the value in the input field, the name variable is updated automatically. This is the main benefit of two-way data binding with ngModel. As you can see, when we change the value in the interpolation text box, the value in the other places does not change. This is because interpolation is one-way data binding. This brings us to the end of Part 5. I hope everything is clear and you now have a good understanding of data binding in Angular, including one-way and two-way data binding. If you're passionate about learning new technologies, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Tech Stack, and keep learning new skills. Thank you. And remember, consistency is the key to success.